Hey all, Peter Zeihan here, coming to you from Colorado. Today we're taking a question from the Patreon page, and that's specifically what sort of impact can Donald Trump have on the green transition, both in the United States and wider abroad? Abroad, very, very little. The solar panels aren't made here, the wind turbines are not made here, and U.S. financial support for anyone else's transition is well below $1 billion a year. So, whatever. It's all about what would happen here. And here, the federal government has a lot of means for changing the way the green transition works. A couple things to keep in mind. Number one, green technologies as a rule require a great deal more transmission infrastructure, because where most people live is where it rains, and so you can grow your own food. We don't have a lot of desert cities. So in most cases, we generate power with coal, nuclear, and natural gas relatively close to where we live. And so transmission for most power plants is well under 50 miles. But most of the places that are very sunny or very windy are not within 50 miles of where we live. It's in the Great Plains, it's in the desert Southwest. And so you have to build these pieces of infrastructure to generate power well away from where people are, and then you have to wire that power to somewhere else. And that often means crossing jurisdictions. And if you cross a economic or political jurisdiction, the regulatory burden becomes more robust. And it's up to the federal government to try to smooth that out. So if all Donald Trump does is not smooth things out, it becomes a little bit more onerous to build green tech anywhere, because you can't hook it up to a source of demand then. That's problem one. Problem two is much bigger. You see, if you're doing a conventional facility, whether it's coal, natural gas, or a nuke, only about 1/4 of the cost of the facility is in the upfront construction and then linking it up to the grid. Most of the rest is fuel, especially for coal and natural gas. So as a rule, it varies based on where you are and how close you are to the fuel source. As a rule, about 80% of the cost of the lifetime cost of a coal or natural gas facility is the fuel. You basically buy it and burn it as you go. And so with that sort of model, you only have to finance the initial 20% that it's required for the construction of the facility and linking it up to the grid. And everything else, you have an income stream to defray and ultimately overpower the cost of the fuel moving forward. It's not how Greentech works. The whole point of solar and wind is that you don't have fuel. The fuel is free. Well, that means that most of the costs, almost all the costs, are up front. Over 2/3 go to the construction and linking it up to the grid. So the degree of financing you need megawatt for megawatt is more than triple what you need for a more conventional fuel system. Now, one of the things to keep in mind in the United States is that capital costs have roughly increased by a factor of 4 since 2019 as the baby boomers have retired. And the money that they used to have in stocks and bonds that fueled the sort of capital environment that we had 10 years ago just no longer exists. They've all been liquidated, and they've gone into T-bills and cash, which has driven up the cost of financing for almost everything, including power plant expansion. Well, if you've seen the cost of capital increase by a factor of 4 or 5, and you have to finance 3 times as much for wind and solar as you do for coal or natural gas, you can see where the problem is. This is normally where the government would step in with concessionary deals on whether it's on taxes or directly on financing in order to help bridge that gap. And so all Donald Trump has to do is say, I'm not going to finance this stuff anymore, and a lot of it is going to go away, even if, as is the case in the desert Southwest or in the Great Plains, solar or wind are already cheaper on an all-in cost basis over the entire life of the project. But that's not the number that matters. Part of the problem that I've always had with the green community is they keep using this thing called levelized cost of power, which shows how over the life of a project, the cost of solar and wind has gone down and gone down and gone down, and it has, but they assume that there's no problem with intermittency. So like when the sun sets, solar doesn't work anymore. If you pair a more realistic cost structure, because you want electricity after the sun goes down, with the financing issue, then the federal presence in the financing world really is critical. And even in projects that make a huge amount of sense, not just environmentally but economically, if you can't get that financing, you can't have the project. Private industry can step in, but it's going to be a hard sell to do financing for something on concessionary terms for something that is going to take longer to pay out as compared to a coal or natural gas plant. And you might get local and state governments kicking in some for political and environmental reasons, but there's no way that they can compete with the sheer volume that the federal government can come up with. So we should expect a lot of these projects to slow down quite a bit, even if Donald Trump doesn't call them out by name as something that he doesn't like. You interrupt the financing and you simply don't get much new construction.